Well, welcome to everybody. And look, I think this is such an interesting topic, spiritual support in a secular age. And when I was thinking about it and thinking how glad I would be to be here today speaking to you about it, I thought really this has been my life's work, to offer spiritual support in a secular age. You know, I've been writing now for more than 30 years, and one book after another, with great fidelity to the task, actually, and, you know, great feeling of appreciation and gratitude that this was my subject matter. But it could really be encapsulated in this phrase, spiritual support in a secular age. But actually, even more precisely, I think, what I'm offering is spiritual support that has a psychological foundation, that has social implications, and I think those three things are very, very important. The spiritual support, the psychological support, and the social implications of that for us personally, and also for the communities that we are part of and are creating. And maybe not just speaking about it as a secular age, or an age in which religion is not taken for granted, but also thinking about this being an age of anxiety. It is a very strange thing, isn't it, that as we've moved from the 20th century to the 21st century, we notice, I think, as well as participate in experiencing this, that more and more people are feeling quite isolated. People are feeling very quickly judged, and often judged harshly. And I think many people are somewhat at a loss as to know where they can turn for support that would really get them through difficult situations and also regenerate from within. I think this is a very, very big topic for us, and I think every time we come together to share ideas and to think about this together, it's a really important thing. Because one of the aspects that religion conventionally offered, and it was quite profound, was that people could come together to think about the big things that mattered to them, the questions even of life, birth and death, the huge questions, questions of meaning. What is my life for? Why am I alive? What am I doing here in this wondrous place? This place that is also, we sometimes experience as not exactly benign, not as benign as we would wish it to be. So those are questions that we traditionally talk to our religion or our religious communities, and for many people now, that's no longer quite a possibility. And yet, those big inner questions remain. And I would also go so far as to say that when we feel their prompting, when they become our questions, when they become personal to us, we are incredibly fortunate. We are incredibly fortunate if we give ourselves the opportunity, not necessarily the space, we don't always give ourselves the space, but at least some opportunity to really consider what the foundation of our lives could possibly be. It's enormously important, and it raises another question which I think is so apt for thinking about today, which is the question of faith. We used to think about faith as belonging to our particular religion. I remember as a girl, we learned, and I'm sure Tom Keneally did too, and here we are in the Tom Keneally room, he would have sung this also. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death. I'm sure some of you could sing this. Well, but you know, it wasn't just faith of our fathers and mothers, it was also the repository for many of our questions, but it didn't take into account, this rather banal hymn, didn't take into account that for many people in the world, this was not their faith, and that, but still, the questions that they were asking were very similar. So we've moved into a different time. We've moved into a time where we can really appreciate that whatever people's cultural background, whatever people's religious tradition, whatever people's race, colour, gender, people who are fortunate enough are asking incredibly similar questions. And these questions are, if I can repeat myself again, mainly to do with how am I living? Is the way that I'm living bringing meaning to my life? Am I moving through life learning something about wisdom? Something about forgiveness? Something about love? Something about compassion? Something about inclusivity? Or am I not? Because the opportunities to learn more about those things really are there. So I think that at this particular point in our shared history, we have such a marvelous opportunity to rethink what faith is, to rethink even perhaps what religion is, and certainly to rethink what spirituality is. And so just very, very quickly, I want to suggest to you that in thinking about spiritual support, what we are acknowledging is something that transcends religion. It speaks to the place within all of us, without any boundaries, without any borders. It speaks to the place within all of us that is willing to learn something from within that can be expressed without. This sounds so simple, but it's actually profound, because what it also means is that we must be brave enough, courageous enough, inspired enough, and supported enough to go to that place within that we could call soul, that we could call spirit, that we could call Buddha nature, depending on our formation. But that allows us to know that spiritually speaking, we are one human family. And that spiritually speaking, and that from a place of spiritual understanding, we utterly depend upon one another. We live interdependently, whether we acknowledge this or not. But we live interdependently and far more joyfully, and with far more confidence, with far more faith even in ourselves and one another, when we can acknowledge this. When we can see that your happiness depends at least to some extent on my behavior, and my happiness and my safety and my healing of my sorrows depends at least to some extent on how you behave, on how you regard me, on how we regard one another. When I wrote Seeking the Sacred, that was very much what it was about, that the discovery of the sacred must, at this point in our evolution, depend upon discovering the sacred in everyday life, discovering the sacred in everyday actions, and taking that seriously enough to be responsible for who we are and who we are becoming. And there's a lovely story that I tell in Seeking the Sacred. Those of you who know my books know that I tell lots of stories, because it's a way of really bringing ideas to life so that you can really see yourself in that story and really be inspired by it. And so we can share our experiences, which is the fabric of spiritual writing and spiritual talking and spiritual telling and spiritual evolving. And this particular story is one that I've thought about very often and have told since, but I want to tell it to you in a slightly different way today. And the story emerges from a retreat that I gave at Mana Retreat Centre in New Zealand, where I've been teaching for about 14 years. I've been teaching at Pitt Street Uniting just down the road for 8 years, but I've been teaching at Mana Retreat Centre for 14 years, particularly at Easter. And at this Easter retreat, there was a young woman called Kirsten, a German woman living in New Zealand. There are lots of German people living in New Zealand, and they love it for many reasons, partly because of the relationship to the land, seeing the land as a sacred teacher, and I agree with that. But this particular Easter, Kirsten made a remark about herself that was quite disparaging of herself. And I would guess that each one of us in this room, including myself, is quite capable of saying things about ourselves in the privacy of our own minds or to other people that are quite disrespectful, quite disparaging, quite forgetful of our own soul, of this gift of life that is so precious. We can so easily forget that. So on this particular day, Kirsten happened to say that, and she gave us such a gift by doing so, because in response to that, I was able to say to her very spontaneously, Kirsten, you are enough. And then, really inspired by that moment, I asked everybody to stand, and we had quite a lot of confidence in each other by this point in the retreat. I asked everybody to stand in our circle, and I moved around the circle, and as I looked at each person in turn and said their name, I reminded them that they are enough. And of course, by the end of my movement around the circle, we were all in tears. We were in tears for the countless times in which we had told ourselves that we were not enough, that we were not enough to meet our sorrows, that we were not enough to deserve our joys, that we were not enough to be loved as we long to be loved, that we were not enough to love others as they may long to be loved. There are countless times in which we have discounted our inner gifts. And when I was thinking about telling you this story today, I realized something quite freshly, which is that at the level of personality, and at the level of ego, and at the level of the familiar self that we meet every day, one another, we are not enough. It's true, actually, we are not enough. That in order to be enough, and this is really the theme of Seeking the Sacred, particularly, but it was also the theme of choosing happiness. It was also the theme of forgiveness and other acts of love. It is also the theme of heaven on earth. That in order to really access that place of enough, which is also a place of great humility, let me say, it is not a place of false pride, and it is certainly not a place of separation and divisiveness. It is a place in which we truly meet one another, but it is also a place in which we truly meet ourselves, because it is the place of the soul. It is the place of the spirit. It is the place that we do not have to be deserving of. We don't have to prove ourselves. We don't have to get yet more qualifications in order to be worthy of it. What we have to do, though, is something that's sometimes harder than getting qualifications. We have to be brave enough to meet that place. And we have to be brave enough to meet the world from that place. And how do we do that? Well, we have had spiritual teachers throughout recorded history guiding us, urging us, advising us. Come to me, all you who struggle and are burdened, and I will give you rest, said Jesus. Come to me, all you who struggle and are burdened, and I will give you rest. There's no judgment there. There's no separating of sheep from goats. Ghastly thought, isn't it? Sheep from goats. And there are similar teachings in all the great philosophies, in all the great religions. In the Upanishads, for example, there is the most exquisite teaching that Krishna gives to Arjuna, and I give it in full in Heaven on Earth, where Krishna, speaking as God, says, you are all jewels on a single string. Imagine that. No jewel is left off this string. No jewel is judged to be unworthy of being on this string. And then, at the very end of that particular passage, Krishna says to Arjuna, I abandon no one. But we sometimes abandon ourselves, don't we? We sometimes even abandon the brief, beautiful, regenerative spiritual practices that bring us back into touch with this place where we are enough because it is enough. So I just want to finish this talk by reminding you very briefly, because I remind you at far greater length in the books, and you can of course ask me questions in a few moments, but the very foundational spiritual practices that really allow us to be who we can be in this life, even when it's hard, and that will also carry us when the time comes for us to leave this life, an event that we may sometimes dread, just as we dread the loss of our own loved ones in this world, and I truly, truly understand it. But the very foundational spiritual practices, and I won't call them basic, because they're deeper than basic, are of course to give ourselves some space each day to set the compass for our day. You can call it meditation if you like. You can call it reminding yourself who you are if you like. You can call it prayer if you like. Although the prayers themselves, and I teach so much about prayer in Heaven on Earth, so because some of us have ideas about prayer that it's simply petition. On the contrary, really it is a reminder to bring ourselves back into a relationship with the sacred, and how you call that, how you define it, is much less important than how you experience it. How you experience love coming back into your life on a daily basis, and actually not coming back into your life, but you remembering that it is always in your life. So those few moments at the beginning of your day, throughout your day, in prayer, in meditation, but also, and I really ask you to experiment with this, but also asking yourself, what is the inspiration that I particularly need today? In choosing happiness, I offer you a library of strengths, and I call it a library because you can borrow whatever strength you need pay nothing for it, and you can try it out throughout that day and see if it works for you, and it will. The strengths, of course, include all the sacred virtues that I wrote about in Forgiveness and Other Acts of Love. But if we ask freshly at the beginning of our day, you can be absolutely sure that when a difficulty arises through the day, if you remember what your quality is, you will be able to move through that time of difficulty with a feeling of enough, or nearly enough, or at least my heart is a little bit lighter than it would otherwise have been. And in that you are also learning something that is incredibly important, which is that these qualities are available to you. You do not have to rely only on the personality self, or the ego self, or even your memory. You can rely on your soul strengths, and you are worthy of that. So that's a really double-edged, double blessing, that you are asking yourself what strength you need, but you are also giving yourself a great opportunity to learn far more about who you are and also what you are. It's giving you a chance to learn, as some traditions would say, something about your soul consciousness as well as your personality consciousness. And that is immensely important. And the third strength that I really ask you to pay attention to on a daily basis is gratitude. Is to really think deeply about what it is that you can give to others, that they could be grateful for, and also what that you have received from others that you are grateful for, even if sometimes the lesson was a harsh one, but that it's allowed you to see something differently. So, for example, the story that I've just told you about Kirsten, we could have thought that was a moment even of embarrassment for Kirsten to realize that she was not enough. But in fact, it's quite different, because in experiencing that, she articulated it for all of us. And we could all come to a different place because of what she articulated. So sometimes the experiences for which we can be grateful are not just the delicious ones, the delightful ones. They're sometimes the ones in which we had to learn what we needed to think about yet again, in order that we would move through life with just a little bit more wisdom, with perhaps a good deal more kindness, with perhaps a little bit more grace, and with considerably more gratitude. Those lessons of gratitude often do come strangely garbed, you know, but they're not the sweeter for that. They're not less precious for that. I want to end by reading you two prayers from Heaven on Earth. I called Heaven on Earth. You might notice that I pay a lot of attention to the titles of all of my books, because in a way I think of them like mantras that even just saying it brings a flavour of heaven on earth, because that is our responsibility actually. That is what waking up to our spiritual potential is really all about. Of course we're all inadequate to the task, but there's nobody else. There's only us, all of us, inadequate to the task, which makes it in a way even more of an adventure, doesn't it? If it was easy, it wouldn't really be an adventure. So when I think of those titles, choosing happiness, forgiveness and other acts of love, the universal heart, seeking the sacred, heaven on earth, I really think of them as mantras. Phrases that you can really take into your own heart and see as a kind of beacon. Which is it that I need? What is it that I want? What is it that I'm going to be turning over in my mind? All right, I want to share with you two prayers that one I was inspired to write, but the other I am deeply, deeply inspired by. And we cannot even imagine how many countless millions of people have been inspired by these words, which I have changed only very, very slightly, as I changed many of the ancient prayers in order to bring them into the flow of our 21st century consciousness. I'll tell you at the very end what it is, for those of you who don't recognize it, but many of you will. You, O God, are our safe place and our strength. You help us constantly in times of trouble. We have nothing to fear. Even if the earth should change, even if the mountains were to disappear into the sea and the ocean's waters were to roar and foam, there is an inner river, the streams of which make your city glad, making us glad everywhere that you are known. Nations may be in an uproar, kingdoms may collapse, yet at the sound of your voice the earth gentles. You are with us, our silent center. You may cause wars to cease forever. You may break the bows and shatter the spears. You may burn shields with fire. Then God speaks. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know. Be still and know that I am what the people seek. Be still and know that I am what the earth praises. And then we listen again, and we say, you, Lord, are with us. That, of course, is Psalm 46 that was given to David thousands of years ago. But it's also given to us today. Today. And how nourishing, how encouraging, how personal it is still.